Hi everybody. Today we're going to talk about Bitcoin and the underlying technology of blockchain.
So what is blockchain? Now, the authors of a recent book on blockchain describe it as an incorruptible digital ledger of economic transactions. Now, that's a nice and concise definition, but to the uninformed listener, this might seem a bit confusing at first. So I'll elaborate through an example. Now, imagine your community wants to get off the dollar. You want to switch to Bitcoin. Much of the same reason why Bitcoin was created, you've decided that you don't want a government or other financial institutions like banks to regulate your currency. You want to give the power back to the people through a peer-to-peer network like Bitcoin. So you take everyone in your community, you put all their names on a ledger, and all the amounts in Bitcoin that they have. What happens if you want to exchange currency? Well, let's say that you want to give your friend John 1.2 Bitcoin for a service or a product. You would take 1.2 Bitcoin out of your spot on the ledger and add 1.2 Bitcoin to his part. Now this is called a transaction, and it's added to what is called a block. A block is just a list of all of the transactions which have happened in the past 10 minutes. This block is then transmitted across the web to a number of nodes and miners, which are just the people who verify the transactions through a number of complex math equations, which are used to bypass the encryption on the transaction. When the first miner has solved the problems, he tells the rest of the nodes, and they verify his work and validate the block. The block is then added to the blockchain, which is just a chain or a list of all of the blocks from the beginning of the currency. So for something like Bitcoin in your community, Bitcoin was created in 2009, so it's every single 10-minute interval from 2009. This is what gives blockchain the incorruptible descriptor. Since there are so many that build on each other, if somebody were to try and hack or commit fraud in a certain block that's being worked on, they'd have to change every single block from before then, which makes it a very secure and important part of technology today.
So, there's a lot of different types of cryptocurrencies, and the way that they utilize this blockchain technology is really different in all of them. First of all, you have things like Litecoin, whose purpose is a lot like Bitcoin or even the dollar, and it's being used as a unit of transaction. It differs from Bitcoin just in some of the underlying algorithms. Things like the sizes of the blocks that you use to transact are different. Then you have other things like Monero, which is also similar in being used as a unit of transaction, but its main focus is decentralization and really removing any ability of banks or the Federal Reserve to regulate or even know who's trading. Next is Ethereum, which uses something called smart contracts, which executes orders once specific predetermined conditions are already met. And then there's things like Filecoin, which is really very specific use. It's being used for buying and selling space on servers. So, be very direct if you wanted to sell space on your very large server that you had. This is, the coin that they have devised to, use to do that. Then there's other things that are maybe, less purposeful, like the Kanye West coin, which, there's nothing particularly useful or interesting about this coin other than it has a funny picture on it. And it made enough people laugh that they bought it and its value went way up. Eventually he sued, so it's not around anymore. But, the point that you should really be getting out of this is that there's a number of different ways that this technology is being utilized, and not all of them are actually useful. So there's two different places, there are actually a number of different places, but two main places that you can really buy and sell Bitcoin. One is Coinbase, so that's they sort of restrict the speed at which you can get your money in and out. So that's being used as maybe like a longer term asset holding wallet. While Kraken is very quick, they offer financial services like limits, stop losses, all these different shorting. That Coinbase doesn't. A lot of day traders use those. So just looking at the prices to get a better idea of why Bitcoin is being used in these different ways is over time it's it's excellent hold. If this was a stock, it'd be like the stock of the century. A lot of people made a lot of money off of this holding it for a long time. However, in a day-to-day span, it went from $6,100 to $5,700. So, that's an absurd amount of volatility, and there's a lot of people who trade this, minute to minute.
Cryptocurrencies offer complete access to the exchange system. There are over 2 billion people inside of the world that don't have access to financial services. This would go ahead and let them into that market. Next thing we have is that there's lower fees. Miners get a transaction fee for every transaction that they go ahead and mine, so this eliminates fees for consumers. Next thing we have, there's a lower risk of fraud. Because cryptocurrencies cannot be duplicated or counterfeited, people like this idea. Next thing we have is there's direct transfers. So you just transfer from one party to the next. You just ignore third parties and you don't have to deal with anything else. So this cuts down on time and people like this aspect. Then we also have reduced identity theft. There's a reduced amount of identity theft because debit and credit cards, they operate on this pull basis. This pull basis, pretty much you give them your account information whenever you go ahead and swipe your card and they pull money out of your account. And then instead what cryptocurrencies do is they operate on a push mechanism. So instead of having someone pull money out of your account whenever you don't know, you can just go ahead and send money to people in whatever account you want to. Next thing we have up is the challenges. So we're going over the monetary challenges first. First challenge is, Alex mentioned this, cryptocurrencies are extremely volatile, which is not really good for a currency because what you want is to have a currency is a stable currency so that whenever you go ahead and trade with people, it's fair. Next thing we have is there's a built-in deflationary aspect. So, for example, Bitcoin has a cap of 21 million. This go ahead and increases inside of value every time, like as it progresses. So this takes out the inflationary aspects of government regulation, which could be bad for people. And the next thing is, this kind of ties into volatility. This is not necessarily a guarantee of value. There's no guarantee of value, so then when people go ahead and save their money inside of it, they can go ahead and lose all the money inside of an instant. This relates back to a crash inside of 2010, where people were able to go ahead and duplicate the amount of Bitcoins that they had. They were able to get 184 million Bitcoins inside a transaction, which is well over the cap. Now because of this, Bitcoin dropped in value. They eventually erased this transaction, so it's not around anymore. But it's good to know that there are some aspects around that could possibly lead to potential problems.
Now, another thing that I wanted to speak about is the future risks associated with actually using cryptocurrency. How many of you have actually heard of the Silk Road? All right, quite a lot of you. Okay. So, well, Silk Road, for those of you that don't know, it's a platform for trading vice and actual illicit drugs, and you can actually order stuff like Hitman. It's hysterical. Yeah. Well, it's found on the dark web. You can't just Google search it. What that means is the dark web is literally a place on the World Wide Web, but unfortunately, us as public users can't really access it. You need more of like specialized software and special codes in order to access it. And the thing is that cryptocurrency is being used as the main form of actual money to buy this sort of illicit activity, vice topics and stuff. So what that means is that the connotation of Bitcoin is getting a negative reputation. So this problem that it poses is that Bitcoin is being viewed as very bad in a negative light, and people who use Bitcoin are viewed as people who buy illegal stuff. And this poses the question whether or not we should do investigation of the use of Bitcoin and actually track where Bitcoin is going, or should we leave it anonymous and allow free trade?